Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So, before I tell you what I have got with me, I want you to quickly tell me what's your understanding of post-colonialism.
Ma'am, I am guessing the writings in like in the sense of historical period. It is right after this sense of identity as not a colony but as a separate country, and then the writings that belongs to the country.
Okay, who are some of the post-colonial writers?
Even Ruth Pravar, I'm guessing. Yeah, some.
Even outside India?
Coetzee.
What makes his writing post-colonial?
It's a narrative that is not the colonial powers narrative.
Okay, so there are these different post-colonialisms in when you talk about different literatures. So broadly, it can be said that it's a very loosely, it's a rejection of the colonial narrative. And in a certain sense, if you look at, for example, Midnight Children as a post-colonial text, there is a rejection of the grand narrative of the nation as well. Yeah, so it is both simultaneously working together, rejection of the colonialist historiography and to a certain extent the rejection of the nationalist historiography as well. Yeah. And this work, Midnight Children, has been considered as the text that inaugurated both the post-colonial moment as well as the postmodern moment in Indian writing in English. Yeah. And postmodernism is also, as you know, it's again a rejection of all the grand narratives. It's an incredulity towards meta-narratives. And this work has also been considered as very typically postmodern. There's this postmodern critic Linda Hutcheon, who even coined a word to talk about these sort of works, historiographic metafiction. So this work, in that sense, it has ceased to become a national property. This is no longer part of our national literature in that sense, and Rushdie has also become an international celebrity, as you know. So about Midnight Children, it was published in 1981, and as soon as it was published, there was an instant kind of recognition, an instant celebrity status that this work acquired almost like overnight. And this also happens to be his second work. Which was the first one that he wrote? Any idea? It was a very less known, not so successful work called Grimus. It was mostly an experiment in science fiction that was not successful at all. And only after Midnight Children became a huge success, people started looking at Grimus. Now there's also considerable scholarly work that exists on Grimus as well. So as soon as this was published, it went on to win a series of prizes, the important ones being James Tate Black Memorial Prize in 1981 and the Booker Prize in 1981. And its popularity did not end by this moment of winning the Booker Prize, and we also know the entire gamut of Indian writing in English, Indian fiction in English gets redefined after Rushdie's Midnight Children. And in 1993, again Midnight Children wins Booker of Bookers, and in 2008, Best of the Booker. Yeah, so now it's impossible not to take a look at this text, and if you look at the scholarly body of work that exists, it is almost unsurpassed by any other writings which have been published. And there have been a lot of flack also that this work acquired, that it was not really the merit of Rushdie. That moment required this sort of a writing, and anyone would have written in a similar way. Those sort of things have been there. Many have rejected the deliberate magic realism that he builds in. But nevertheless, now it is difficult to ignore this text. And if you want to work again on Midnight Children as a researcher, you would find it very, very hard to look at newer themes, look at newer frameworks within which you can situate this text, because this work is one of those works which have been done to death, as they say. There are these companions which have emerged. There are works which look at the intertextual elements, and in all of those frameworks, though he is seen as part of Indian writing in English, his persona as well as this text reception has ceased to be national. It's now seen as a a text which is part of, the general post-colonial oeuvre as well as, the contemporary world literature. Yeah, so that's a kind of status that Midnight's Children enjoys. And Salman Rushdie is a British Indian. He was born in 1947, British Indian as far as, right now his identity is concerned, of Indian origin entirely. An international, now he is an international celebrity, we have no doubts about that. Much has been written about him, not just as a literary writer but also in terms of the political controversies that he caused. You all must be familiar with the fatwa which was issued against him in 1989 by, who issued this fatwa against him?
Iran's Khomeini.
Yeah, Ayatollah Khomeini. Yeah, and so if you are not familiar with this controversy, please read up about that. So this event also further sort of elevated his status as a celebrity, and for a while he even had to be sort of remain undercover, underground as he puts it, for a very long time. His autobiography which came out, like he doesn't really call it as an autobiography. There was this work that he published in quite recently, Joseph Anton. Yeah, so that's mostly autobiographical in nature. It also talks extensively about his period which he had to spend rather anonymously in Britain after the fatwa in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Joseph Anton incidentally is a name that he acquired during that time. He couldn't really lead a normal life for a long time, and the magic of his writing is such that though we may have like a lot of reservations against him, the kind of controversy that he has been part of at various points of time, even Joseph Anton, it forces us to sympathize with the author in certain way. Yeah, he talks extensively about the way he had been sidelined within India, about his relationships, and the entire narrative is pitched in such a way that you invariably sort of feel terribly sorry for that man. But we all know the kind of writings which have been otherwise available about him as part of journalistic writing, etc. This film was made into a movie in 2012. It was made by Deepa Mehta. That again was led to a number of other controversies. It couldn't, it was not even shot in India because they couldn't make the film in India. There were a lot of controversies associated with it. And there are a number of works that he published after that as well, but it would be rather like safe to say that this is his most famous and most acclaimed work. And a number of reviews have come out about his other novels, other works, saying none of them could really match up to Midnight's Children. And if you compare Midnight's Children with any other of his writings, we will also feel that he couldn't really bring back the same kind of magic that he could foreground in Midnight's Children. This is not to say that this had in any way affected his fame or affected his success. He continues to be regarded as the best known face of Indian writing in English, and perhaps the international celebrity that Indian writing in English has produced. So this is the broad outline of this novel. It's titled Midnight's Children, and the story is about Midnight's children. So what exactly happens is at midnight, this midnight is also a very direct allusion to the independence that we got at midnight. So there are these two boys who are born in a Bombay hospital, and they are switched for whatsoever reason by a nurse. And around this same time, in that midnight hour, from 12 to 1, about 1000 children are born. So altogether it makes it 1001 children. So what's the connection? 1001, does that remind you of something else? Yes. Yeah. So there are these very deliberate intertextual references within the text throughout, and these 1000 children also they are all part of nation's history, and there's a storytelling that all of them do, and all of these Midnight Children, they are all endowed with unusual gifts. Yeah, anybody who is familiar with the work? What are those unusual gifts?
Read people's mind.
Huh?
Read people's minds.
Yeah, and also the central character. Who's the central character? Salim Sinai. He can even smell things. He's endowed this unusual, uncanny ability of smell he has. So this is the way in which magic realism works here. Yeah. So what is magic realism, by the way? Magic realism is a technique through which, in a very real, ordinary situation, magical, supernatural elements are woven into the text. Yeah. It's not like fantasy which is set in an unreal world. This is a real world and the magical elements are woven into the text as if this is the most common, most natural thing to happen. There is no big deal about the supernatural elements which are woven into the text. And narrative begins technically at this midnight hour, but it also just like are you familiar with Tristram Shandy? Yeah, where the story begins even before the protagonist is born. Yeah, so it's in the same way, and Rushdie also has acknowledged in multiple places that he was immensely influenced by Lawrence Sterne and his writing techniques. Yeah, so here also the story starts with the previous generation, and then it leads on to the life that the protagonist leads, and so this is what happens. This is the older generation with which the story begins, Aziz and Nazim. Actually, Salim is a son of a Hindu woman and a British colonialist, and Shiva is a son of this Muslim couple, Mumtaz and Ahmed, but they get switched at birth. So, Salim gets raised by this Muslim couple. Yeah, and it also in that sense right at the outset totally challenges the idea of religion and how identity is linked to it. Yeah, it also exposes some of the promises of secularism that was made at the time at the midnight hour. Yeah, so this is perhaps the finest story, many have agreed, which also narrates the nation in such a beautiful way, because the protagonist Salim Sinai's life is also narrated as an allegory of the nation. So this work is divided into 3 books. The first book deals with Salim Sinai recounting the events till his birth. Yeah, this is like before his birth. It's also been said that this is the book which imagines the emergence of the nation. Yeah, and book 2 has Salim recounting the various events of his childhood and adolescence till the death of his parents. Yeah, and book 3 talks about the widow, and widow is also a reference to Indira Gandhi and Salim Sinai crumbling away having completed his task, because his body is also an integral part in the telling of the story. His body disintegrates as and when he is narrating. He is telling the story to whom and all, you will figure out even if you read through some of the sections. You do not avoid the first chapter, read the first chapter. And also if you read excerpts from here and there, some of the things may begin to make sense to you. And I mean you can try and access summaries from different online sites, but the problem is that this is such a fragmented text that there is no single story which can be told. Even the summary would be like very complicated to read if you've started accessing those online summaries. Most of them, they try to give these chapter wise summaries. It is again and some of the summaries, when I was going through them, it's more laborious than reading the text itself. Yeah, it's as fragmented and as long-winded as the text itself is. So the book 1 is sort of a retelling of how the nation was imagined, and book 2 in fact talks about Nehru as the mirror of the nation, about the Nehruvian nation that emerged in the post-independence period. So because in the novel there are very direct references to real historical figures and real historical incidents. There is even a place where Nehru writes a congratulatory note to this protagonist, but there are a lot of unreal elements also which are part of it. There is a lot of history which he imagines that had happened as well, and Rushdie also acknowledges that those were like deliberate, maybe my memory had failed me. So he refuses to engage directly with the deliberate flaws that he had included in the text as well. And the third part is that phase, the emergency phase, where India becomes Indira and Indira becomes India. It becomes impossible to separate one from the two, and he also talks about the emergency phase. And in that respect, this work is also seen as one of the finest anti-emergency works. And there is also this thing which is said about this novel, that there was a couple of lines which made direct reference to Sanjay Gandhi and Indira Gandhi, and he was forced to take that line out because Indira Gandhi was unhappy about it. In the later editions, it seems that one line which offended Indira Gandhi was not there. So, I will not give a detailed plot summary as such. Maybe this framework will help you to access the text in an easier way. So, there are certain historical instances, real historical instances which are referred to: the Rowlatt Act and the Amritsar massacre in 1919, transfer of power 1947, the States Reorganization Act in 1956, Indo-Pakistani Air War in 1956, the Bangladesh Liberation War 1971, in India's first nuclear test, which also was called Smiling Buddha in 1974, the event of emergency 2 years 75 to 77, and the subsequent sterilization and the civic beautification programs that we know about, whatever happened after the emergency. And if you look at these set of events, at least some of them, they do not have a proper official narrative, like Amritsar massacre or transfer of power, how it also had a dark history to it, the horrors of partition, and about again, the state reorganization was not a very neat and tidy process. There were a lot of struggles and lot of though it was not a bloody affair, it was not a neat happy affair either. So, and emergency, another event in the nation where we do not have a proper official narrative. So, he tries to narrativize these incidents, drawing from history and also imposing a certain personal touch to it. There are two possible, one is secular national narrative, cosmopolitan narrative. So, there are two narratives which go simultaneously. If you look at the narrative of this novel, there is a secular national narrative on the one hand, which makes it a national allegory. There is also a cosmopolitan narrative which makes it post-colonial in a certain way, which also makes the text accessible to a non-Indian reader as well. So, this is the maybe when you are reading the text, when you are trying to analyze it, you can keep these two as sort of like a road map through the text. So, this novel is in fact more than any other thing, it is a critique of the post-Nehruvian era. What is the significance of the Nehruvian era? Who was Nehru? Why is the Nehruvian era considered very significant in India's history? Most of the things which were formative to the nation in terms of, now when we look back, the foundations of almost everything, even the terrible things which are surfacing now, the foundations of everything was laid down during that period. So, later this entire era came to be known as Nehruvian, and even after Nehru's term as Prime Minister, after his death also, this term gets used for a long time. In fact, the first significant breakdown of the Nehruvian consensus about progress, about democracy, about planning, about the growth of the nation, all of this happens from in the 1970s, and the culmination of which we find in the event of emergency. And after that, a number of critiques about the Nehruvian consensus has come out. This novel does not entirely critique the post-Nehruvian phase, does not entirely critique the Nehruvian phase. At some level, it also, we get this feeling that it's still upholding the Nehruvian golden age, and also like speculating that things would have been better had the Nehruvian project been taken into the completion. But the novel is largely set in a post-Nehruvian mood. After the nation ceases to bask in the glory of whatever it began to achieve in the post-independence period. So, this also very significantly, it questions the compartmentalization of religion and politics. That was something key in the Nehruvian imagining of the nation, that religion need not interfere in the nation, in the political affairs. Religion and politics should be two separate things. But in the contemporary, we know that there is no way in which one can be separated from the other. Maybe this forceful compartmentalization had also not really enable people to deal with either of those in an effective way. Even when Dalit historians talk about how caste had been dealt with in the post-independence period, many feel that it is this separation of the private from the public which dealt to this non-engagement with certain unsettling and uncomfortable factors of the nation. So, he also questions in this process, in Rushdie's novel, the process through which Nehru tried to come up with this rationalist premises on which he believed that the nation can really progress. So there are a number of good things about that, but also the flip side of this was being all the more visible in the post-Nehruvian phase, especially after the emergency period. Maybe some of those things we'll also hear about in the presentation in the next two classes. And he also talks about a way in which these two works, Constitution and Discovery of India, there is Indian Constitution and Discovery of India as a text authored by Nehru, and these two texts are considered as foundational to the nation. There is a way in which the narrative of the nation, narrative of the nation's progress has been told to us in such a way that the Discovery of India, it ceases to be a text authored by one of the Indians, but it becomes a foundational text in imagining the nation itself. So he also at some level we feel Rushdie is subscribing to that, and he also departs from that quite significantly. We will not go into the details of this. And this novel also signals a breakdown of this Nehruvian consensus, where religion, caste, they are no longer considered as private or apolitical categories. They are very political. They are also categories which need to be engaged with in the public space, in the public sphere by private individuals. He also talks about this ever widening gap between state and nation. What's the difference between the state and the nation? What is imagine? Nation. Do you want to elaborate on that?
State is a political purpose. Nation is an imagination where there is a community feeling among an imagined group of people.
Yeah, because if you look at any nation which emerged, even before the nation emerges, it's first imagined. Yeah, there's Benedict Anderson who first talk about nation as imagined communities. Yeah, so there is a, regardless of the political territory, the state, the nation first exists in the imagination, and this is why a number of problems of the nation are also glossed over, because in the imagination it's a unified unit, it's a unified territory, it's a unified set of people, it's a homogeneous set of people which are imagined. And this novel addresses the gap between the state, the widening gap between the state and the nation. Yeah, it does not feel inhibited to talk about this gap. If you compare Midnight Children with the other works produced from India, there is a need to continue to talk about this imagined community. There is a continued need to foreground the aspects of the nation which were important even before the nation emerged and in the post-independence years. But here he is fearless in that sense to talk about this gap between the state and the nation, and also talking about how the state failed in a certain way in responding to this imagination which was there in the first place. Yeah, and he also addresses the rise of the right-wing politics in a critical way, and which is why there is a character whose identity is fragmented in a way. It's a predominantly a Muslim character, who is at the surface level, but we also know that if you get to the heart of it, the identity, the formation of the identity is not very easy. Yeah, it's not entirely in terms of the lineage, in terms of blood. Yeah, it's not an entirely a Muslim character. So he also problematizes the idea of the secular, how the identities are categorized, and the rise of different kinds of politics in comparison with the different identities that emerge. Yeah, and there is a way in which he also talks about the Nehruvian India as a secular past. Yeah, he critiques it, but there is still a falling back on the Nehruvian model, wondering whether that would have been the perfect way to take this nation forward. And some of the things which you would be constantly hearing in connection with this text: code mixing, hybridization of language. There is this continuous use of English and Urdu. He is also the first Indian English writer who had stopped bothering about using the King's English or the Queen's English. Yeah, he very generously mixes registers, codes. Yeah, he is not very reverential about the kind of language that he is using, and there are also references to language riots in Maharashtra, and there are references to a lot of the these fragmentations of identities in terms of religion, in terms of caste, in terms of personal political affiliations, in terms of language, yeah, so on and so forth. It would be possible, though the idea of the secular can be critiqued at various levels within this novel. There is also a way in which this novel can be seen as participating in this mission to come up with a secular narration just when the ideas of secularism, just when the ideals of secularism were facing a lot of threat, a lot of danger in the post-emergency era. And Rushdie himself has acknowledged in some of his own writings and some of his interviews that one of the impetus was also the emergency for writing this novel. So, the post-emergency had refashioned the secular self within India in particular ways, yeah, and secularism, the way in which secularism began to be understood was very different in the post emergency era. So, when you look at Indian writing in English in general, until this moment we were talking about mostly about post independence, yeah, and now there is another marker suddenly to talk about, yeah. Independence ceases to be the only big thing that happened in the nation, independence and partition, yeah, and now we have emergency, which sees the breaking down of all of those promises on which the nation was supposedly built in the post independence period. So, this novel in that sense, it is also narrated from a minoritarian perspective. There is a trajectory of predominantly of Muslim identity which is being foregrounded, but this is of multiple parentage, which as we know, yeah, he is raised by a Muslim couple, but the parents are Hindu and British, yeah. And the narration also begins in 1915. It also significantly begins with an event which results in Salim's grandfather's loss of faith, and those things are also narrated with a lot of irony, a generous dose of irony, and you also find many of those things very hard to believe. It is not as if a life changing thing occurred in his life for him to lose his faith, yeah. It is a very trivial silly thing that happens, which we will not go into that in detail. So, there is this section where he talks about, and my grandfather, this is this happens. This is a description of a moment which leads to his loss of faith, yeah, and this happens right after he offers his prayers. And my grandfather, lurching upright, made a resolve, stood, rolled cheroot, stared across the lake, and was knocked forever into that middle place, unable to worship a god in whose existence he could not wholly disbelieve. Permanent alteration, a whole, yeah. So, it is not as if something really happens, yeah, and something very trivial happens which I want you to figure out, yeah, or maybe in the next presentation you will get to know something very trivial happens and he makes this life changing decision. And this beginning is very significant to the novel Midnight Children, because we have a character who is predominantly Muslim, whose identity is Muslim, but that is not really tied with his ideas of faith. Yeah, so it exposes the fallacies of the ways in which identity works. It also talks about talks about how secularism has not been defined in a proper way. It is still defined in terms of religious identities, faith. Yeah, so what happens to a person, a citizen who say rejects his faith and retains his religious identity, yeah. So, those are some of the things which the novel very ironically explores, and there is an unreliable narrative voice. I hope one of them will be talking about the unreliability of this text. He himself has said, there are a lot of, Rushdie himself has said, there are a lot of errors in it, because I am just writing from my memory could fail me, yeah. If you have a better memory, you can write another one, yeah. So, whenever the flaws in the text or the deliberate errors in the text were pointed out like that, he even has written an entire a very small essay on this, the errata in Midnight Children. I think I have given that as part of your reading material. Take a look at that, just about 3 pages. I think one of them will also be talking about this, the unreliability of this narrative voice, yeah. And what he does is, when he is trying to reject the model of secularism which is available to us, he is also endorsing a different kind of radical secularism, a minoritarian secularism, as some of them have put it. And in this radical secular approach, the story of India is told by a Muslim, a minority, and he also tries to rethink an India in which the category of the Muslim, the identity of the Muslim is not just in terms of minority. And there's also a narration of an India which is both India and Pakistan at the same time, which is why maybe strategically he begins the narration before the moment of independence. In order to access the story of Salim Sinai, it is important to know what happened before that. And at some another level, allegorically, he is also telling us to know the history of this nation, which was born at the midnight hour on 15th August. To know the history of this nation, you need to go back to the early 20th century. There is no isolated history that this nation owns. It's a fragmented, multiple history which is shared by both India and Pakistan. Yeah. So, which is why he was not really acceptable to the nationalist historians. He was not really acceptable. Rushdie was not really acceptable to the nationalist ones, and he also rejects those tendencies of nationalism. Even in the introduction that we took a look at, he talks about how those nationalist tendencies will not be useful for taking the literature of the nation forward, and this is also a vice that he associates with the regional writers. And maybe this protagonist Salim Sinai is also this perfect example of a fragmented identity and also the multiple influences which has shaped his identity. He is a middle class boy with a Christian ayah, Hindu and Muslim parents. He is living in the cosmopolitan city of Bombay. He is also a young man who fights in the army. So his identity is fragmented. His identity cannot be pinned down to one particular term or one kind of compartment in any way. And he predominantly talks about a secular space which needs to be carved out for the Muslim. This is again, this becomes important because he is writing at a point when nationalism is associated, nationalism is seen as privilege of the nationalist Hindu. And he is also writing at a time when there is a need for rewriting the nationalist history is being envisioned, because subaltern studies also happens during that time. We have no direct kind of an evidence to prove that Rushdie influenced subaltern studies or subaltern studies influenced Rushdie. There is very little dialogue we can find between them, but nevertheless that was also the time when the nationalist historiography was being reimagined, rewritten from different quarters. There is a work by Priyamada Gopal where she quotes from Nehru's discovery of India, and there she also identifies this thing about how Nehru says, since British rule came to India, Muslims have produced a few individuals of the modern type. So there are a lot of these deconstructive textual analysis which has been taken of which has been done of Nehru's work, which also exposes some of the biases which were inherent. So one really does not know what kind of position Rushdie takes with respect to his critique of the post-independence period, whether he is entirely endorsing the things that Nehru said, or is he taking some of the progressive things from the Nehruvian ideal and rejecting the idea of secularism which he talked about, which also excluded the Muslim from participating in the secular institutions of the nation. And he also talks about Salim's grandfather, who is not much of a Muslim. He is also weary of the Muslim League. It's not as if by virtue of being a Muslim he is readily readily a part of Muslim League in terms of his political affiliations. He is tired of both his Muslim identity and also the politics that is foregrounded by something like Muslim League. Because the text also talks about the disillusions that the Muslims faced in the post-independence period. There is this place where his father says, I blame myself, Salim Sinai, I blame myself entirely. We made ourselves too public. These are bad times. Sinai bhai, freeze Muslim assets, they say, and you make him run to Pakistan, leaving all his wealth behind him. Catch the lizard's tail and he'll snap it off. The so-called secular state gets some damn clever ideas. We are a secular state, Nehru announced, and Morarji and Patel and Menon all agreed. But still, Ahmed Sinai shivered under the influence of the freeze. So there are these references to a lot of historical incidents, lot of historical figures, and there's a lot of irony in this. And he is clearly, Rushdie is clearly not endorsing the idea of nationalism which is currently prevalent, but one is not too sure what exactly he is rejecting and what he is embracing. He is not too much on the radical side either. He is not entirely rejecting the nationalist historiography, but only certain aspects of which have given rise to a skewed kind of secular nationalist discourse. Yeah. So, this has also been seen as an attempt to trace a genealogy of post-colonial citizenship. Yeah, this is seen as the poster novel of post-colonialism in that sense. And in terms of the magic realist elements, even this character Salim, he often shifts between belief and skepticism, and those are seen as very regular common occurrences, but there are certain supernatural elements which are built into it. The novel talks about magicians living in Delhi, about a Muslim ghetto which is in the shadow of the Friday mosque. Yeah. So, a lot of those things are part, there is almost like everything that could be talked about India is part of this novel. So, the intertextuality of this text, there are a lot of references to intertextual references to Marquet's 100 Years of Solitude, Tyndrum, Tristram Shandy, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Quran, and Saadat Hasan Manto's short stories, Nehru's speeches, and a lot of newspaper accounts. Yeah. The veracity of all of these, because sometimes he even quotes, misquotes, all of that is part of the narration. Those are also deliberate strategies. He does not really comment on those things. And this work has also been seen as an example of the post-colonial exotic, in sense of the Booker continues as the Booker event is seen as a continuation of the imperial literary condescension. Yeah, like the imperial master still telling us, validating the work in certain ways, because the Booker event was also very instrumental in catapulting this work to fame, and also in Rushdie being this redefining figure in Indian writing in English. And maybe again, after we discuss the novel, that would be appropriate to come back to this discussion. And post-colonialism itself has been seen as a market strategy in terms of the global literary market. I am not talking about the idea, the concept of post-colonialism, but writing for the post-colonial market has also been seen as a strategy. And there were also similar narrations around the same time. The Trottenama published by Alan Seeley. The novel was published in 1988, but it was written much before that. And Alan Seeley, it is said that he comes across the novel and then he decides to change some of the aspects, because that also originally had a narrator who was born at midnight. Rushdie also talks about how it is just a historic accident that he became the first one to publish such a novel, because he says he came across at least half a dozen writers from different parts of India who were conceiving of a similar novel. Yeah, which is why he himself believes that maybe this sort of a novel was there, that the novel was begging to be narrated by the nation. Yeah, because at least half a dozen other regional writers were also conceiving this idea in multiple ways. But again, this was the first one to get published, so there is absolutely no use talking about what the fate of Rushdie or Midnight Children would have been if some other novel had got published before that. Alan Seeley, in his one of his interviews, he writes, two writers responding to the same historical moment. They have read the same book, but the book is India. We do not write but are written. And Rushdie also pretty much echoes the same thing in most of his works, like whenever he is questioned about the inclusion of certain events or the exclusion of certain events, either he says, these are the things that I remember, or he says, these are the things that India has begged me to write about. And Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh also, though the narrative framework is a little different, that is also a retelling of the nation's history. So, we could in fact trace a number of works which also again rewrite the nation, retell the nation's story in different ways after Rushdie. This is the review of the book that appeared in New York Times. This was in 81. So, this is what was written about the book in 1981, and this is the reception that it got in the West. It is impossible to resist a novel that contains a sentence, "My sister, the brass monkey, developed the curious habit of setting fire to shoes," or one that will pause to observe. As it considers an unhappy India, sacred cows eat anything. According to Midnight Children, guilt is a fog, optimism is a disease, freedom is a myth, fried spiders cure blindness, and Gandhi will die at the wrong time. Yeah. So, those are some of the other things. The obvious comparisons are to Gunther Grass, and this has been, lot of scholarly work also exists in that sense, about Gunther Grass and Marquez. I am happy to oblige the obvious. Like Grass and Marquez, Rushdie gives us history, politics, myth, food, magic, wit and done. Towards the end, in fact, this protagonist also has a connection with pickle. So that's a way in which it includes the grandest narrative and also the most trivial of things from that. The protagonist also considers that he is handcuffed to history, and this phrase has been quoted and misquoted in a lot of works after Midnight Children. He also uses this phrase chutnified history, and the phrase has been used to talk about his language as well, the chutnification of English, and how Rushdie makes it possible after Midnight Children. Then he adds in no particular order: blind art lover, a poet who is verbless and impotent, some cultures and cobras, a peep show and many clocks, telepathy and the nose as a genital organ. Mr. Rushdie isn't nice, although he is funny and vulgar. The world of Midnight Children is not at all genteel as the world of Anita Desai tends to be. It's a shadow in Paul Scott's mirror, or perhaps what E.M. Foster heard in the cave, with a lot of symbolic curry added. The clocks, the dreams, the ambiguity of snakes, the moon and the silver spittoon, the fishermen and the clowns. He is asking who broke us apart and why must we die fragmented for a failed India and 1001 plots. So right from the beginning, the comparisons have not been with other Indian English writers, but the comparisons were with either with other post-colonial writers or other figures who were already established canonical writers. So even at a later point, the comparison is always, whenever Indian writing in English is talked about, and if Rushdie is also mentioned, it's always about whether the other writers are matching up to this standard. But Rushdie's work, per se, it has never been compared with any other Indian English writer, and he only acknowledges two writers who had influenced him, Lawrence Sterne and G.V. Desani, who wrote all about H. Hatter in the 1940s. After Rushdie acknowledges G.V. Desani and all about H. Hatter, it comes back into print. That's the kind of power that Rushdie has, not just as an author but also as a person who has a power to reinvent canon, right? So these sort of rave reviews continue to happen in the Western scenario. Maybe India was a little late to respond to this sort of mega reception that Rushdie was receiving. For at least for a while, even scholarly works did not really come out, but by the end of the 1980s, this sort of his position was further solidified and cemented. Initially, the Booker was also seen as yet another colonial jester. Many didn't want to comply to that, but now there's no going back. There is no point in wondering whether this is actually a well written text or not, but this is the reception, and this has been now seen as a national allegory. And if you want to see it in any other way, it's harder also now. Even if you are really bent on seeing other narratives in this, now we have been so blinded by this, the plethora of works written about Midnight Children, that it's difficult to even access the work as in isolation, without considering the frameworks of post-colonial writing. So there are these three things that this review highlights. If I understand Mr. Rushdie, he is equally outraged by the English imposition on India, Indira Gandhi's emergency which did away with liberal democracy in India, and the novel itself which can't find out how to explain partition and fragmentation and a hole in the spiritual heart. So this is how this novel becomes post-colonial and post-modern at the same time. It's a metafiction. It is it talks about there is self-referentiality. The novel is unhappy about the novel, and the novel is unhappy about the nation as well. There is an article by John Mee who talks about the Indian English novel in the 1980s and 1990s. In the first paragraph, right in the first line, he says if 1980s and Midnight Children, if it has witnessed the second coming of Indian writing in English, then Rushdie is its messiah. So that's the sort of status that has been accorded to him. Though in that, that's a very well acclaimed article by John Mee, John Mee. throughout the work, though he is talking about the novel of the 1980s and 1990s, Rushdie emerges as the most important figure. Even when the other works are being talked about, it's always in connection with Rushdie. How it, either it is Rushdian in a Rushdie-esque in a certain way, or it moves away from Rushdie in particular way. So Rushdie, quite inadvertently, that essay was written in the late 90s. Yeah. So by then, he emerges not just as the most important figure, he also emerges as the yardstick, yeah, the standard against which the rest of Indian writing in English is evaluated and judged. Yeah. And in the post 1990s phase, some of the feminist critics have written against this, the consideration of Rushdie as a central figure, so that other kinds of writings have not, in such a way that the other kind of writings have not been able to emerge at all, because either one writes about the nation and gets recognition. If one is not writing about the nation, it is also seen as an inadequacy, as a failure, because one is not competent enough to talk like that. Even in this review that we took a look at, you saw the direct comparison between Rushdie and Anita Desai, because before Rushdie, Anita Desai was the best known international face from India, and after Rushdie emerges as the most famous, the most visible one, Anita Desai's work is also seen lesser in terms of, though she also enjoyed a wide readership, it is not seen as grandiloquent, as profound as Rushdie's works are. Yeah. So I hope you will take a look at the novel to get a feel of, his narration. Please read the first chapter at least before you listen to the presentations. And also, I think it would be rather dumb to do an entire course on Indian fiction in English and not to have read Rushdie at least partially. Yeah. So get a sense of that, and it would be, I don't think they also will be able to cover the critical ground, yeah, which talks about the novel, because much has been written, difficult to bring all of them together. So mostly it will be a general discussion based on a couple of themes that they would highlight. Yeah. So you also read up, and if you have more things to talk about, let's take a look at that in the next couple of sessions. Okay. So we wind up with that. Thank you.